combined balance sheet exceeding 70 billion US of African multilateral financial institutions, or AMFI for short, is a real powerhouse. It's bringing together the continent's most dynamic financial engines to drive transformative development. Now, leading this impressive organization, having recently succeeded President Orama, who was the inaugural chairman of AMFI, is another visionary leader dedicated to advancing Africa's development through uniquely African solutions. As President and CEO of the Africa Finance Corporation, AFC, Mr. Samaila Zubairu has pioneered transformative financing initiatives that have unlocked billions of dollars for essential infrastructure across this continent that we love. So, please join me in welcoming a true architect of Africa's future, Mr. Samaila Zubairu.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please allow me to stand the clearly established protocol today. Our gracious host, my dear brother, President Benedict Orama, honorable ministers here present, I would like to call out our Honorable Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Mr. Wale Edun, who gave us a mandate to do the domestic diaspora bond, which our governor talked about recently. And this transaction was awarded a prestigious award last week in London at the Europe, Middle East and Africa Awards. Speaking to the idea of having vision and to finding ways to domestically enhance our resources. Distinguished guests, all protocols observed. It is a pleasure to gather with you today as we celebrate 32 years of impact by Afreximbank, an institution that has not only stood with Africa and the African diaspora in times of crisis, but has actively shaped our continent's path to resilience and transformation. Let me commend the board, management, and staff for the successful organization of this AGM, and above all, the past presidents who have been acknowledged here, and the entire team for wonderful organization. I also want to commend Professor Orama for his visionary leadership and unwavering dedication to Africa's progress during his tenure as president of the bank. Under his stewardship, Afreximbank has become more than a bank. It has become a pillar of African self-reliance and a first responder in moments when others hesitate. At the Africa Finance Corporation, we are proud to have traveled alongside Afreximbank on this journey. Together, we are building the Kano-Maradi rail line, strengthening regional integration and activating the promise of the AFCTA. We are together building the African Medical Center of Excellence. We together build several projects across the continent. More importantly, we are focused on one of the most important things that would turn around our future and prosperity on the continent. We are together building transformational projects that will move and transform Africa's commodities and produce to finished and processed goods for use within the continent and outside the continent. We have been working together on the Arise Integrated Industrial Platform. First, they were lenders to the project, and then they eventually became equity partners alongside us. And we're finding ways to strengthen that partnership and to do more across the continent, especially here in Nigeria, where we have a new ambition of trying to transform the textile sector in the country. Again, we're focused on how to create more jobs, because we believe jobs are the most important parameters of success for growing economies. So the more jobs we can create together, the better a future we can leave for the next generation. This partnership extends beyond collaboration. It demonstrates a shared mission to realize the Africa we want. I would like to stand here before you today as the chair of the African Multilateral Financial Institutions, AMFI, established by African heads of states and the African Union Commission in February 2024. AMFI unites Africa-owned and Africa-controlled multilateral financial institutions that have been built by Africa for Africans to deliver the Africa we all want. Alongside Afrexim and AFC, our growing membership includes the TDB Group, Africa Re, ATD, Shelter Afrique Development Bank, ZEP-RE, East African Development Bank, Africa Solidarity Fund, and FEDER. And I'd like to announce that last week here in Abuja, AFDB mentioned that they want to join AMFI, and so that's a big plus for us. Together, AMFI members manage a collective balance sheet exceeding $70 billion. And with the addition of AFDB, you know what that will look like. It will be almost at the $200 billion that the public development banks in Africa collectively manage. But the opportunity and responsibility before us is far greater. Our most recent State of Infrastructure report indicates that Africa has over $4 trillion of domestic capital pools. The interesting thing is that over $1 trillion of that is in non-banking assets. That means with the right regulatory reforms and structured intermediation, we're able to channel a big proportion of these funds into the infrastructure that will enable industrialization, create jobs for our people, build infrastructure that ensures connectivity for Africans and trade amongst Africans. We are keen to observe that we have over 405 billion in pensions, mainly in South Africa, Nigeria, Morocco, Egypt, Kenya, and several other countries. We have over 314 billion in insurance assets. We have over 150 billion with the sovereign wealth funds. These are African resources that must be mobilized and deployed at scale to meet our own trade, infrastructure, and development needs. As we've always said, Africa's development must be owned by Africans and it must be financed by Africans. I would say that one of the first meetings I had with Professor Orama when I first became president of AFC, in fact, he was actually the first person to send me a letter of congratulation, and he engaged me then on how we could work together. One of the things we agreed upon was that we must take ownership of our development and we must lead in the execution of that ownership. And that means working together to do projects. That means working together to mobilize resources, as we have done. That means working together to deliver the promise that Africa needs. That is why, under the leadership of His Excellency President João Lourenço, the chairperson of the African Union and president of the Republic of Angola, and in close partnership with other NEPOD, we are activating the AU Development Fund, a new platform to bridge critical financing gaps to accelerate delivery of Agenda 2063. As the world becomes more fragmented and nations increasingly turn inwards, Africans must look within to look forward. Find solutions for our development challenges. The era of reliance on external benevolence is giving way to one of self-determination, and this is the new reality. African multilateral financial institutions are more critical than ever. We are significantly policy important because we have demonstrated that without us, most things would not happen on the continent. So it's important that we continue to work together to advance development and accelerate development impact for our people. We understand the terrain, we are invested in the outcomes, we have skin in the game. Our African multilateral financial institutions are not only technically capable, they are ideologically aligned with our shared ambition to transform Africa. Our fates are intertwined. To do better for our people is not a mission, it is a necessity which must be realized. Recognition of the policy importance of these institutions, African governments have invested their capital, signed enabling protocols, and enacted legislations necessary to make African multilateral development banks fit for purpose, impactful, and efficient. This partnership demonstrates the shared vision and the aspiration of the people of Africa, and is aligned, enduring, and responsive. We must therefore empower these institutions as the first point of call to channel domestic capital into Africa's development priorities and to lead our economic resilience and renaissance from within. In closing, I call on all of you to work with African financial institutions to ensure that we remain resilient and that we work together to strengthen African financial institutions and not join the fray in attempts to weaken African multilateral financial institutions. And we do that by really respecting the laws of our respective countries, where we have already empowered these institutions with the immunities and privileges that's required for them to continue to de-risk opportunities in their domestic territories and to mobilize capital at scale for development within the continent. Africa's prosperity demands that we invest in our own resilience. This we rely on through our institutions, and we must act with urgency and unity in shaping our economic destiny. This is the purpose of AMFI. This is the work we must now accelerate. So I call upon our governments, our regulators, and our private sector leaders and our institutional investors, stand with us, work with us to deepen our capital base, support us in strengthening our credit ratings, empower institutions to lead where others cannot. Africa's financial architecture must be robust, integrated, and sovereign, because only then can we seize our moment in history. Let us build Africa together. Let us build our future together. Congratulations once again to President Bénédicte Orama for your amazing stewardship of Afreximbank and all that you've achieved with your team. Thank you for your friendship, your vision, and your enduring commitment to achieving Africa's full and dynamic potential. Thank you.
Thank you, Samaila Zubairu, President of AFC. AMFI is clearly a game changer. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's a special moment as we honor an enduring icon of African finance and vision, Dr. Babacar Ndiaye, former president of the African Development Bank and a pioneer of African-led development. Now, he championed the creation of key institutions like Afreximbank and Shelter Afrique, and his unwavering belief in Africa's potential continues to inspire us and inspire generations. So please enjoy this message from the past. It's a tribute to a true African champion.
En vérité, le succès que nous avons remporté en créant l'Afreximbank, compte tenu de tout le scepticisme qui a entouré cette entreprise, m'a fait proclamer dans ma déclaration prononcée lors de la première Assemblée générale en 1993 à Abuja, qu'Afreximbank est sans doute un modèle unique de développement d'un partenariat constructif, fondé sur une base multinationale, et qu'il est un véritable triomphe à la gloire de l'imagination, de l'intellect et de l'esprit africain. Où peut-on trouver une autre organisation internationale créée sur la base d'un accord passé entre différentes nations souveraines, mais appartenant à un grand nombre d'institutions et de personnes du secteur privé, et fonctionnant comme une entreprise à but lucratif et sur la base de principes commerciaux sains? À ce titre, Afreximbank est un exemple. Comme certains d'entre vous ici présents le savent sans doute, le chemin parcouru entre la vision exprimée dans la déclaration inaugurale en 1985 et la création de l'Afreximbank en 1993, en passant par l'autorisation reçue en 1987, fut long et tortueux, nécessitant, comme je l'ai déjà annoncé du tact, de la diplomatie et du pragmatisme pour naviguer entre les obstacles qui jonchaient le chemin. I will, at this juncture, also like to mention an emotional dimension and inspirational factor that played an important role in shaping our bank. In May 1993, I visited South Africa at the invitation of ANC and the then government of South Africa, as we were preparing for a multilateral role. Visiting Cape Town and seeing the status of Cecil Rhodes, a man credited with a dream of linking Cape Town to Cairo through a road network, I was inspired to work towards a translation of that dream into a noble pan-African reality through the work an African Exim Bank will do in the promotion of trade from Cairo to Cape Town and vice versa. Above all, Afreximbank's support to intra-African trade will play a crucial role in the promotion of African regional integration. In this regard, the specific operation responsibility of the Afreximbank are not ends in themselves. They have broader purpose to enhance Africa's standing in world trade. Beyond its purely financial mandate, therefore, Afreximbank will be expected to act as a forum for collective action in a wider multilateral framework, giving Africa more weight in global trade negotiations than could be arranged by any one country or a small sub-regional grouping of countries.
You know, Marie-Angèle, we are so blessed in the next 3 days with some incredible champions of Africa convening. It's going to be quite a remarkable who's who. Now, I know I did protocol before at the beginning, but I feel the urge to just do it again, because there are so many people here today. You've heard me mention many names, but I'd just like to very much welcome the representatives of global African presidents here present and former presidents. I know that His Excellency Namadi Sambo is with us, I believe, who is the former Vice President of Nigeria and a very strong advocate for Afreximbank's work. You're most welcome, sir. Heads of governments from global African governments, and also our Caribbean friends and family are here. You'll hear from someone in a moment that very much fits that description. Representatives of His Excellency the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, His Excellency Kashim Shettima, is here. The former presidents of global African countries, former vice presidents of global African countries. I mentioned before our dear leader, Professor Benedict Orama, President and Chairman of the Board of Directors of Afreximbank, Ministers of Finance and Coordinating Ministers of the Economy, and Nigeria itself, the host of the 2025 Afreximbank annual meetings. The chairperson of the African Union Commission is represented by Her Excellency the Deputy Chairperson, His Excellency Wamkele Mene, the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat in Ghana, ministers and representatives of global Africa, including African and Caribbean, central bank governors. We heard from Nigeria's central bank governor here, and we know that Egypt and many others are here with us today. There are ambassadors, there are members of the diplomatic corps, there are former presidents of Afreximbank here, senior government officials, senior global African government officials. We heard from Mr. Samaila Zubaro from AFC. There are board members of Afreximbank Group. There are royal, regal fathers, kings here present today. There are senior executive vice presidents and the executive vice presidents of Afreximbank, captains of industry, friends and partners of Afreximbank. I should stop now, shouldn't I? I think I've said enough. Okay, thank you. You're all welcome.
Thank you.
in Francophone areas. And I think looking at him made me realize that his dreams are not behind us, they're ahead. So, c'est à nous aujourd'hui de porter ses rêves encore plus loin. I'm switching back to French. Mesdames et messieurs, nous poursuivons ce moment d'échange avec une intervention qui est très attendue, parce qu'elle est empreinte de vision et d'engagement. Vous savez, c'est un honneur pour nous aujourd'hui d'accueillir une voix qui est résolument engagée et depuis de nombreuses années en faveur d'une unité toute particulière, l'unité caribéenne et africaine. Cette fraternité que parfois on oublie. Un leader dont l'action s'inscrit pleinement dans les ambitions portées par Afreximbank pour notre région. Please join me, ladies and gentlemen, in welcoming His Excellency the Honorable Dr. Terence Drew, Prime Minister for the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. A warm welcome, please, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
As I took the flight from home to travel here, I looked out the window. The skies were beautiful. The Atlantic seemed clear. I reflected on my ancestors who came across in ships, but I also reflected on the fact that there were hardly any other aircraft in sight. There and then I said to myself, there's much work that has started, much work to do, so that one day the air traffic from Africa to the Caribbean would be as busy as other regions in the world, as the flying time is pretty much the same. Let us not doubt ourselves, for it was Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and I think that we all know who he is, a propagandist of Africanism, who is and who was, I would say, the national hero of Jamaica. And he said, I trust that you will so live today as to realize that you are masters of your own destiny, masters of your own fate. If there's anything you want in this world, it is for you to strike out with confidence and faith in self and reach for it. He further said, to take advantage of every opportunity, and where there is none, make it for yourself. And Afreximbank embodies this adage. Where there seemed there was no opportunity, Afreximbank has created for us and for itself. Put your hands together for the Afreximbank. Let me, of course, recognize all of the excellencies who are here, esteemed colleagues, honored guests, but I especially want to recognize my brother, President, Chairman, President Orama. Put your hands together for him. He had gotten me here today to fly 8 hours just to spend 36 hours. So it tells you the deep respect that I have for this gentleman. Let me recognize, of course, all who are here in this room today. I thank you for coming. For this, for me, as a Caribbean leader, it means more than a gathering. It means that we are on a shared journey, a journey of prosperity. And so I relish this moment, one that I dare say is profound and personal. Ultimately, I am elated to stand before you here in Abuja, Nigeria, for the 32nd annual meetings of the Afreximbank. And I was just recently in this great city. So I bring warmth from your Caribbean brothers and sisters, and specifically from the government and people of St. Kitts and Nevis, a region and a country not only bound to Africa by ancestry, but by aspiration, purpose, and now by bold and growing partnerships. Let me extend heartfelt congratulations to Afreximbank for reaching this milestone. 32 years of courage, resilience, and service to its people. 32 years of choosing vision over fear, action over hesitation, and competition and community over competition. From its founding, this bank has taken on a mission far greater than commerce. It has carried the burden of opportunity, building systems that empower African peoples and economies to chart their own course, to finance their own progress, and to trust their own. Institutions like this one answer their own questions about what is possible. That mission is still unfolding, and it is still as urgent as ever. Allow me to take a moment to pay special tribute to my brother and my friend, Professor Benedict Orama. Under your stewardship, Afreximbank has become more than a financial institution. It has become a living testament to what is possible when leadership is not only competent, but deeply conscious. You have expanded the horizon. You have expanded the horizon of what African leadership and institution building can mean. You have been both strategic and soulful, firm in your technical leadership, but also emotionally intelligent in how you have guided relationships, built trust, and told a new story about what Africa and its diaspora can build together. I speak of this not in abstraction, but from a place of deep personal reflection. When I met Professor Orama for the first time in 2022 in Barbados, just 1 month after taking office as Prime Minister, I was struck not only by his clarity of purpose, but his generosity of spirit. That meeting planted a seed, and I left with the firm conviction that the work of connecting Africa and the Caribbean was not just about speeches and symbolism. It was about systems. It was about finance. It was about reshaping the machinery of cooperation across the Atlantic so that it no longer simply echoed our history, but actively built our future. From that first conversation, it became clear to me that Afreximbank, under President Orama's leadership, was not simply welcoming the Caribbean into its orbit, it was embracing us as kin. That is why St. Kitts and Nevis was proud to be the very first country in the Caribbean to sign a memorandum of understanding through Afreximbank. That was not a diplomatic formality. It was a deliberate act of trust. A prime minister and a government, we believed in the bank's vision. We believed in his vision. And we took a step not just on behalf of our country, but on behalf of the entire CARICOM region. That step has proven to be one of the most impactful and future-facing decisions we have taken in recent years. It is also why, above the desk in my office, hangs a painting, a gift from Professor Orama. And I see it every day. And I do not just see the art, I see a reminder that partnership is built not only on contracts, but on character. That beyond the bureaucracy of intergovernmental relations lies something that is far more powerful. Those things are relationships, trust, shared identity, shared accountability, and shared ambition. That is why today, as we gather under the theme, Building the Future on Decades of Resilience, we must remember that resilience alone, though critically important, is not enough. Resilience is what carried us through colonization, through exploitation, through decades of underdevelopment, to decades of being shut out and listen to the story of what brought the Afreximbank together, of course, pleads to this. But resilience must now be matched with reinvention, with the courage to reimagine ourselves as architects as we build our countries and economies together. That is where Afreximbank's true legacy lies, not only in what it has protected and built thus far, but what it dares to build in the future. Today, the Caribbean is no longer a distant observer to Africa's renaissance. We have become an active partner as the sixth region of the African Union. So thanks to the Afreximbank, we have moved from the margins to the center. The bank's establishment of a regional office in Bridgetown, Barbados, the first and only Afreximbank office outside of the African continent, was a political and spiritual gesture. It signaled to us that in the Caribbean, that we are no longer the forgotten family members of this great continent, but we are truly the sixth region of the Union. Since that time, the Afri-Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum, ACTIF, has become the premier space for mutual engagement between our regions. ACTIF 2022 in Barbados, ACTIF 2023 in Guyana, and ACTIF 2024 in the Bahamas have collectively mobilized over $6 billion in new opportunities. And we look ahead with great anticipation to ACTIF 2025 in Grenada, where I am confident that more will be delivered. And dare I say that I also now look forward to ACTIF 2026 in St. Kitts and Nevis. But these meetings, these agreements, these events are not the end. They are the beginning of a new era, an era where African and Caribbean businesses co-finance tourism, co-develop climate resilience infrastructure, co-create fintech solutions, and co-author the story of what a truly global Africa looks like. Earlier this year, I led a high-level delegation from St. Kitts and Nevis to this great city, Abuja. It was a productive, affirming, and deeply meaningful journey. During that visit, we had discussions that spanned renewable energy, biotechnology, agriculture, creative economy, and education. Out of that visit came opportunities that are already being activated, including new project development frameworks and cultural exchange initiatives. And just this month, we were honored to receive an African delegation in St. Kitts and Nevis. That visit represented a physical crossing of a once tormented corridor, the Atlantic Ocean, that for centuries symbolized our forced separation. But this time, the journey was not one of sorrow, but one of solidarity. The visit breathed new life into our shared commitment to build a new bridge that I call the Atlantic Bridge, one made not of wood and steel, but of people, of partnership, and of purpose. We are now reimagining the Middle Passage, not as a scar, but as a route, not as a memory of bondage, but as a pathway of boldness. The waters that once carried our ancestors away in chains now carry our children's dream, our nation's ambitions, and our sheer determination to reunite across the Atlantic in pursuit of sovereignty, prosperity, and dignity. As Prime Minister, I've made it a core foreign policy priority to see Africa and the Caribbean not as two regions with occasional overlaps, but as one extended family with an economic, diplomatic, and developmental destiny that is interlinked. Under my upcoming chairmanship of CARICOM in January of 2026, I intend to lead missions of regional heads of governments back to the African continent. This will not be a courtesy call. It will be a declaration of intent, a commitment to further embed the Caribbean into the architecture of global Africa. And to those who may ask why now, I say because we cannot afford to wait. President Orama has taught us that. Because the world is changing fast. And because in this era of fragmentation, we must become more together, not less. Global supply chains are being redrawn. Financial institutions are recalibrating. Climate change is accelerating. And global equity remains elusive. In such a context, the greatest risk we face is not overreaching, it is retreating. It is remaining limited. It is failing of our shared power as regions. Afreximbank, under the leadership of President Obama, did this better than most. Not in words or ideas, but in action. The bank has not merely spoken about Pan-Africanism, it has invested in it. It has operationalized it. It has expanded it beyond continental borders to embrace the Caribbean, and in doing so, it has reminded the world that together, yes, we can. The Caribbean seeks partnerships. We seek access. We offer in return our creativity, our resilience, our market potential, our human capital, and our strategic location. Together, Africa and the Caribbean represent a dynamic economic and cultural bloc that the world cannot ignore so long as we do not ignore each other. As St. Kitts and Nevis pursues its sustainable island state agenda, an ambitious plan to transform our country into a model of resilience, green innovation, and inclusive development, we look to institutions like the Afreximbank and co-creators of a new development paradigm. We are actively advancing, therefore, geothermal exploration, transitioning our public health infrastructure, modernizing our agricultural systems, and rethinking our citizenship by investment program for national long-term sustainability. These areas are ripe for cooperation, investment, and innovation. So let me close, my dear friends, brothers and sisters, by offering this. Let this moment, this meeting, this year, not be remembered only as the 32nd annual meeting of the Afreximbank. Let it be remembered as the year when something deeper took root. The year when we crossed not just borders, but boundaries of imagination. The year when we decided together that global Africa was not an aspiration, but an institution. Let us walk forward not as scattered survivors of a painful history, but as architects of a powerful future. Let us choose union over hesitation. Let us choose vision over fear. Let us, together, choose to build the future we deserve. Thank you very much. And may our partnerships endure for our people, for our generation, and for humanity, for all of our prosperity. Thank you very much.
Wow. Global Africa is not an inspiration. It's an institution. Another round of applause for the Honorable Dr. Terence Drew, the Prime Minister of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, representing the 6th region of Africa, as the African Union calls it. Now, to give the keynote, representing His Excellency Kashim Shettima, Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. We're so pleased to welcome, and please give him a round of applause, the Special Advisor to the President on the Economy, Dr. Tokpe Fashua.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Well, as introduced, my name is Tope Fasha, Special Advisor to Mr. President on Economic Affairs in the Office of the Vice President. I'm here to read the speech of the Vice President strictly, but before I go on, let me say a special welcome to President Benedict Orama of the Afrexim. You're welcome, sir. Your Excellency, Professor Benedict Orama, President and Chairman of the Afrexim, Your Excellencies, past and present heads of states and governments here present, the Coordinating Minister for the Economy, Mr. Wale Edu, I think he just stepped out, Governor of the Central Bank, Honorable Ministers, Captains of Industries, distinguished delegates and guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, His Excellency Bola Ahmed Tinubu, GCFR, and indeed the government and the peoples of Nigeria, I'm delighted to welcome you all to Abuja for the 32nd annual meetings of the Afreximbank, Africa Export-Import Bank. This is more than a ceremonial gathering. It is a congregation of builders and believers. We gather under a theme that is both timely and profound, building the future on decades of resilience. And today's sub-theme, 32 years of resilient growth and transformation, invites deep reflection on where we've been, what we've endured, and more importantly, where we now aspire to go. Let me begin by expressing our profound gratitude to Afreximbank. Since its foundation here in Abuja in 1993, Afreximbank has grown from a regional trade financier into a continental development anchor. It has mobilized and disbursed more than $100 billion across Africa and over $52 billion to Nigeria, more than any other country on the continent. I'll take the applause. It's for the Afreximbank. In Nigeria alone, Afreximbank's transformative footprint include the African Trade Center, commissioned here in Abuja, which now serves as a nucleus for policy innovation, trade facilitation, and business intelligence. The African Medical Center of Excellence, which opened just weeks ago, providing world-class oncology, cardiology, and hematology services, and reducing the over $1 billion spent annually on medical tourism. The African Quality Assurance Centers in Kaduna and Ogun States, strengthening the export readiness of Nigerian products. A $300 million export manufacturing initiative, strategically located in Cross River, Enugu, Imo, and Kano states to catalyze industrial clusters. And the pivotal $3 billion Intra-Africa Petroleum Trade Facility, enhancing Nigeria's energy security and supporting domestic refining capacity. These are not merely projects, they are strategic investments in resilience, in sovereignty, and in shared prosperity. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our administration is pursuing one of the boldest economic reform agendas in Nigeria's history. Because resilience is not passive, it must be planned, built, and protected. We have unified the exchange rate, eliminating multiple FX windows to restore transparency and investor confidence. We have phased out fuel subsidies, saving billions of dollars in leakages and reinvesting in social protection and infrastructure. We have launched a national compressed natural gas CNG transition plan, converting over 150,000 vehicles and reducing fuel costs and emissions. We have accelerated strategic infrastructure, including the Lagos-Calabar Coastal Highway and the Eastern Rail Corridor to improve regional connectivity. We have transformed our oil sector, introducing real-time tracking of exports, and enhancing revenue assurance through the Petroleum Cargo Declaration Scheme. And we have expanded access to trade finance and restructured support to small and medium enterprises through digitized platforms and AFCFTA-aligned export development zones. These actions, while difficult, are already yielding impact. GDP is expected to grow at between 4 to 4.5% in 2025, and I see the CME also nodding his head because he's pushing for 7%. Inflation is stabilizing, reserves are strengthening to circa $40 billion, and the central bank governor is here. Our economy is on a firmer, more diversified footing. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the past 3 decades have taught us that resilience is not just survival. It is the capacity to adapt, to lead, and to reinvent. Afreximbank has embodied this ethos. In times of global liquidity crunch, it provided emerging trade financing. In the aftermath of COVID-19, it rolled out the Pandemic Trade Impact Mitigation Facility, PATIMFA. Today, it is shaping continental policy through PAPS, the African Trade Gateway, Afreximbank, and its new concessional finance window. Now, as Africa faces the consequences of global fragmentation, commodity transition, and climate disruption, the challenge is clear. We must go beyond resilience to renewal. That means mobilizing blended finance to crowd in private capital for infrastructure and green transition. That means deepening regional value chains anchored in AFCFTA and powered by scalable industrial policy. That means institutionalizing digital trade systems such as PAPS and MANSA to cut costs and boost intra-African commerce. That means strengthening financial institutions like Afreximbank with new capital, governance frameworks, and risk-sharing facilities. And also, that means ensuring that transformation is inclusive, reaching our youth, our SMEs, and our women entrepreneurs. Colleagues and friends, the future is not something we wait for. It is something we must build. Let us seize this moment at the 2nd annual meetings, not just as a commemoration, but as a commissioning of new ideas, new instruments, and new coalitions for Africa's next chapter. Nigeria stands ready to lead, ready to collaborate, and ready to deliver. We will continue to work hand in hand and with Afreximbank to deepen our partnerships and align more closely with Africa's development agenda. In closing, let me again thank Professor Benedict Orama and the entire Afreximbank leadership for your unwavering commitment to Africa. To all our guests, our friends from across the continent and beyond, Abuja is your home this week. May your deliberations be fruitful, your partnerships renewed, and your ambitions for Africa enlarged. On behalf of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, I hereby declare the 32nd annual meetings of Afreximbank officially open. Thank you very much.
Please join me in expressing once again our sincere appreciation with a warm round of applause. Mesdames et messieurs, nous poursuivons ce programme avec un moment fort. Le lancement officiel des rapports phares d'Afreximbank. Alors vous le savez, chaque année, ces publications nous offrent des clés de lecture très précieuses sur les dynamiques commerciales, par exemple, et économiques qui façonnent le continent africain. To walk us through the highlights of the reports, I am honored to invite a respected economist and a strategic thinker, Dr. Yemi Kale, Group Chief Economist of Afreximbank. Ladies and gentlemen.
Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome once again to the 32nd Afreximbank annual meetings. Permit me to respectfully stand on existing protocols already established. On behalf of the board, management, staff of Afreximbank, it's my honor to present a very high-level preview of two of Afreximbank's most important flagship publications, the African Trade and Economic Outlook Report for 2025 and the African Trade Report for 2025. So why are these reports? So important? First of all, we are witnessing a world in transition. Global fragmentation is deepening, protectionist policies are resurging, multilateralism, once the bedrock of global trade is being tested, some might even say eroded. And for a continent whose development prospects are tightly interwoven with global trade and capital flows, these shifts carry profound implications. At the same time, Africa is contending with complex and compounding vulnerabilities such as high, sometimes unsustainable debt burdens, escalating trade, escalating climate volatility, fragile food systems, significant infrastructure gaps, and so on, which are all converging to constrain the continent's room for policy maneuver. However, within this challenging context lies an extraordinary opportunity to reset, to rethink, and to reposition Africa's development trajectory. So it's against this backdrop that we are presenting these flagship publications. I want to also stress here that these reports are not mere compendiums of statistics or conventional commentary. Rather, they are strategic narratives grounded in data and insight, and together they help us to make sense of the world in flux, and more importantly, to chart a course through it. The African Trade and Economic Outlook Report for 2025, themed Africa's Resilience in a Changing World Order, offers a forward-looking macroeconomic perspective. It examines key trends in growth, inflation, debt, exchange rate dynamics, and trade performance. It also identifies looming risks and emerging opportunities, providing the analytical depth required for sound policy and investment decisions. On the other hand, the African Trade Report for 2025 focused on African trade in a changing global financial architecture, delves into the structural shifts reshaping global finance and trade. It also explores how capital flows, interest rate regimes, exchange rate volatility, and new payment systems are redefining the way African economies engage with the rest of the world and with themselves. In this light, both of these reports serve as more than tools for reflection. They are strategic compasses designed to convert complexity into clarity and insight into action. So they provide policymakers, investors, development actors, and so on with evidence-based options that align Africa's demographic strengths and resource wealth with integrated long-term strategy. They therefore represent roadmaps for navigating this increasingly multipolar and uncertain world and underscore a new phase of African ambition, one where the continent no longer reacts to global developments, but begins to shape them. Let us now drill down into some of the key messages from both reports, starting with the African trade and economic outlook for 2025. The central theme here is that Africa is adapting. Despite a turbulent global environment over the last few years, including the COVID-19 pandemic, commodity price volatility, inflationary pressures, major geopolitical realignments, and increasingly disruptive climate events, Africa has shown and is showing a remarkable ability to adjust, recalibrate, and push forward. Despite a challenging 2024, the continent grew by 3.3%. This represents one of the strongest growth rates in the world. At the same time, Africa's trade rose by 13.9%, with intra-African trade in particular rebounding strongly, growing by 12.4%, thereby reversing the previous year's decline. This performance in 2024 was supported by stronger domestic consumption, rising investment flows, and enhanced trade integration, especially under the AFCFTA. And these were complemented by the consistent support by African multilateral financial institutions such as Afreximbank, which continue to play a catalytic role in financing trade and development. Looking ahead into 2025, despite new risks and emerging challenges, Africa's GDP is expected to grow by 4%, outperforming the global average. Notably, 41% of all African economies are expected to grow above 5%. Average inflation is expected to decline from about 19% to about 15% in 2025 compared to 2023, thanks to tighter monetary policy, price stabilization efforts, and easing supply constraints among many of our countries in Africa. Debt is also expected to improve modestly, with the debt to GDP ratio for Africa falling from 67.2% to 65% in 2025. Finally, African trade is projected to grow 5.1% ahead of global trade. Intra-African trade, importantly, is forecast to grow at 6.6% on average annually between 2025 and 2028. And this will be driven by the AFCFTA implementation, price stability, and Africa's green and energy transition agenda. However, the Economic and Trade Outlook report also identifies several critical pressure points: persistent inflation in many of our countries, growing debt complexity and refinancing risk, escalating trade wars among major global powers, increasing frequency and severity of climate-related shocks, and so on. But beyond identifying risks and providing forecasts, this report also provides a roadmap. It shines a light on where the real opportunities lie, such as opportunities to build resilient supply chains, diversify export bases, and scale up intra-African trade. This report also makes a compelling case, just like the central bank governor mentioned in his address, that resilience is not enough, but must now evolve into long-term sustainability. In other words, we must transform from merely surviving shocks to structurally transforming our economies. This means diversifying exports beyond primary commodities, deepening in industrial capacity and value addition, and investing in human capital, innovation, and infrastructure. Moving to the 2025 Africa Trade Report, it explores how the ongoing global financial fragmentation is reshaping the landscape of trade and what this means specifically for Africa's economic trajectory. At its core, the theme we chose for this year reveals a critical shift where Africa's capacity to trade and grow is increasingly influenced less by traditional barriers like tariffs and more by the evolving dynamics of global trade, such as how money moves across borders, how trade is financed, how payments are settled, and how risks are assessed and priced. Today, the architecture of global finance is undergoing rapid and complex changes. And these changes are characterized by fragmentation driven by multiple forces, including escalating sanctions regimes, rising global interest rates, volatility in the US dollar, and widespread de-risking practices by financial institutions. What makes this financial architecture changing is not just the economic cycles that we are familiar with. It is also the rise of multipolar financing institutions, the global push for de-dollarization, the emergence of alternative cross-border payment systems, and the intensifying debate over the reform of Bretton Woods institutions. So all these trends are reshaping the fundamental levers of trade, including access to capital, cost of borrowing, settlement mechanisms, and ultimately, Africa's ability to build resilient intra-regional value chains under the AFCFTA. It is also important to note that this rise of nationalism and neo-protectionism within the global trading system is in many ways a symptom of deeper systemic shifts, especially financial ones. So by engaging directly with the evolution of the global financial architecture, the African Trade Report is not just documenting symptoms, it is confronting the enablers and constraints of Africa's future trade capacity. In addition, new regulatory frameworks such as Basel IV are tightening credit conditions worldwide and raising the cost of borrowing. While the dollar's dominance remains significant, it faces emerging competition from other currencies. But African currencies largely remain marginalized in global trade settlements. A key outcome of this evolving financial landscape is restricted access to trade finance, particularly for our small, medium-scale enterprises, which make up over 80% of our businesses. The result is currency volatility, higher financing costs, and constrained trade potential. But this also presents a strategic opening. The report calls for building a resilient, Africa-centered financial ecosystem led by African institutions anchored in local currencies and aligned with the continent's priorities. Achieving this vision, however, involves several critical initiatives. Firstly, there is a need to strengthen African development financial institutions so as to close the estimated $120 billion trade finance gap that continues to limit African trade. And that trade gap is not simply a consequence of demand exceeding supply. It's also largely driven by structural constraints like the Basel IV regulatory impact I mentioned earlier, and systemic rating biases that disproportionately affect African financial institutions. To close this trade finance gap and build a sustainable foundation for intra-African trade, the report recommends focusing on 3 pillars: developing local currency financing solutions, innovating alternative financing structures tailored to Africa's unique market realities, and leveraging digital platforms designed to enhance efficiency and accessibility. Together, these initiatives lay the foundation for a sovereign and inclusive trade finance architecture that supports Africa's long-term growth. Secondly, the report advocates for expanding local currency settlement mechanisms through platforms like Afreximbank's Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, PAPS, which will facilitate trade in local currencies with reduced foreign exchange risk and lower transaction costs. Already, we have 15 African central banks that are already part of the PAPS network. Thirdly, it is vital that African voices have a greater influence in shaping the global financial rules and regulations that impact trade finance. Fourthly, the report calls for deepening AFCFTA implementation beyond ratification to more enhanced trade facilitation. So both these reports therefore converge on 5 urgent imperatives. 1, deepen AFCFTA implementation. Secondly, reform the global financial architecture with Africa as an active agent, not a passive recipient. And this includes using our G20 seat to push for fair SDR allocation, credit rating reforms, and inclusion in global financing rulemaking. Thirdly, we need to scale Africa's DFIs, make them bigger, make them stronger, make them more effective. We need to invest in infrastructure, especially digital trade, logistics, and skills. And finally, we need to expand access to trade finance, including expanding the range of instruments so as to close the finance gap, especially for our SMEs and industrial clusters, so as to unlock industrialization. So what is Afreximbank doing in this regard? A lot of what we are doing has been mentioned already this morning. Over the next 3 days, we will hear a lot more of what we are doing, but permit me to mention just a few of the examples featured in these reports. We are not just observing at Afreximbank, we are acting, and you have heard a lot of this already this morning. We are providing strong financial support with double-digit in loans and disbursements. In 2024 alone, we disbursed about $18.7 billion, supporting trade industrialization and resilience across the continent. We are building strategic platforms, PAPS, AFPay, MANSA, the AFCFTA Adjustment Fund, and various innovative finance platforms. We are advocating for Africa to have a seat, a say, and a stake in global decision-making, and in general, advocating for Africa's position globally. We are also helping to shape the architecture of African trade by investing through our funds for export development in key sectors like finance, creative industries, oil, healthcare, and so on. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, this is what engineering transformation looks like, backed by scale, by strategy, and sovereignty. Our agenda is to turn fragmentation into opportunity and resilience into prosperity. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, against this backdrop, it is my honor to respectfully invite the representative of His Excellency, the Vice President, Dr. Tokwe Fashua, the Prime Minister of the Federal Republic of St. Kitts and Nevis, Dr. Terence Drew, His Excellency, Mr. Wamkele Menes, Secretary General of the EFCFTA Secretariat, the Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Mr. Olayemi Kadoso, the Honorary Minister of Finance and the Coordinating Minister of the Nigerian Economy, Mr. Wale Edu, my boss, the President and Chairman of Afreximbank, Professor Benedict Orama, and my other boss, the Senior Executive Vice President of Afreximbank, Mr. Dennis Denia, to come up on stage to officially launch the African Trade and Economic Outlook, as well as the African Trade Report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Another round of applause for Dr. Yemi Kale, Group Chief Economist of Afreximbank. Ladies and gentlemen, this officially launches, we're very proud to launch Afreximbank's 2025 Africa Trade Report and the 2025 African Trade and Economic Outlook. These reports are more than just numbers. They tell the story of Africa's resilience and the rising strength in a world full of challenges. The report highlights how intra-African trade is expanding. It's unlocking huge potential in sectors, machinery, electricity, and food. And it also reveals the power of the African Continental Free Trade Area to shield us and strengthen us from global shocks and drive sustainable growth. This officially launches the 2025 African Trade Report and the 2025 African Trade and Economic Outlook Report. Round of applause, please. Yes, there's even another report coming. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes the launch of the report. Ladies and gentlemen, there's much more to come, so please take your seats so we can continue the program. If I could ask you to please take your seats so we can continue the program. The program is not over yet. We have much more to go. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the hopes of a billion Africans lies in the success of the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AFCFTA. And Afreximbank and the AFCFTA Secretariat have a dynamic partnership powering Africa's trade revolution. Together, they've launched key initiatives like the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, commonly known as PAPS, to ease cross-border payments, the $10 billion AFCFTA Adjustment Fund to support countries during tariff changes, and specialized training for businesses. Now, the collaboration between the AFCFTA Secretariat and Afreximbank spans everything. It spans trade finance, it spans logistics, it spans capacity building, it even spans technical assistance, all geared towards accelerating the AFCFTA's rollout and unlocking Africa's vast trade potential. Now, to give a speech on the theme of Africa's trade and economic integration, please, if I could have the attention of the room, this is a very important speech by a very important player when it comes to Africa's fortunes. So I want you to give a robust round of applause to the Secretary General of the AFCFTA Secretariat, His Excellency Wamkele Mene. If I could ask the members of the press there, please, there's a whole bunch of people there. Please, out of respect, if you could please now leave that area, take your seats again. Everyone taking a photo there, can you not do that and kind of sit down? If everybody could please sit down, thank you, because we need to continue the program. We have His Excellency Wamkele Mene. You're going to want to hear this speech. I'm going to start pointing people out. You know me. I'm not shy. The gentleman with the camera there, can you sit down? This lady here with this book here, Madam, yes, you, please, can you sit down as well? Those people over there, can I get some ushers, please, to help me to get people to their seats? Maybe some of my colleagues. No? Anyone? Okay, thank you. Your Excellency, Wamkele Mene, the Secretary General of the AFCFTA, please, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Your Excellency, my senior brother, President Orama, our heads of states and former heads of states that are here, honorable ministers. It is a pleasure to join you this morning. I want to recognize also the representative of His Excellency Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Her Excellency Salim Hadidi. I would like to start by joining others in congratulating my senior brother, President Orama, over 10 years of distinguished service, leadership, and contribution to the internal market integration of our continent. It is under your leadership that Afreximbank has been truly instrumental in making interventions that advance industrial development, trade finance, and of course, supporting the implementation of the AFCFTA. It is no wonder that our leaders, our heads of states, designated you to champion the recovery of the African continent in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I want to thank you very much for your contribution, Professor Orama and senior brother, to the advancement of our continent. Like Samaila said, days after I was elected, I received a letter of congratulations from you, expressing commitment of support and collaboration. And you were the first senior banker that I met in that capacity, when, of course, I was untested, and some were saying how much of a calamity this is, that Africa has entrusted a baby to such a massive task. But 5 years later, with no hair and a gray beard, you succeeded to help me succeed in the task that I have been given. And so I am most grateful for the support that you have provided to me personally and to the AFCFTA Secretariat. We have to pay tribute to those who came before us, the founding mothers and fathers of the Organization of African Unity, which was born, as you heard earlier, in the historic city of Addis Ababa in May 1963. Our founding mothers and fathers had two tasks that they set themselves. First, the liberation of our continent from the shackles of colonialism, and arguably with the defeat of apartheid in South Africa, that was achieved. The second objective was the economic integration of our continent. And in realizing the economic integration of our continent, they set out a number of subsidiary tasks: achieving a common market, an integrated market, a payment system, amongst other tools of integration. And so today, as we look to the future through the prism and the lens of the past mission of our founding mothers and fathers, it is clear that they did succeed indeed to push back the colonialists and to ensure that our continent is free. However, the second objective has evaded us for many, many decades, and that is economic integration of our continent. In the year 2020, the AFCFTA Secretariat was established with a very simple task: to advance rapidly on the integration of our continent's economy. The founding mothers and fathers had a vision, a truly continental project built on trade, shared infrastructure, a common sense of economic destiny, industrial development of our continent, and of course, job creation for young Africans. the achievement of establishing the AFCFTA, at least at law, guided by our heads of state's decision of 2012 to significantly boost intra-Africa trade, indeed marked a turning point in our efforts to drive inclusive growth, sustainable development across our continent. And so the AFCFTA is ambitious, not only in scope, but also in the depth of trade and investment liberalization that it seeks to achieve. It demonstrates our leaders' unwavering commitment to take charge of our economic destiny through the implementation of the AFCFTA, and particularly through interventions that are aimed at industrial development in our continent. Today, as we speak, the AFCFTA has been ratified by 49 members of the African Union, the fastest ratification since the establishment of the Organization of African Unity for any instrument, particularly an instrument for economic integration. This rapid ratification demonstrates the political will and commitment of our heads of states to advance on the vision of an integrated economy in Africa. So today we present an investment proposition underpinned by a combined GDP of over 3.4 trillion United States dollars, with a population of 1.4 billion people and potentially the youngest population in the world by the year 2050. This unified market is poised to unlock the dynamism of our entrepreneurs, spur on industrialization, as I mentioned, create millions of jobs, and shift our economies from commodity dependence towards higher value addition and structural transformation. As we make steady progress in the implementation of the AFCFTA, with clear milestones ahead to be achieved, not only should we congratulate ourselves for having made this progress in this short space of time thus far, but we must also recognize the challenges that lie ahead. Let me start with the progress made. The political commitment of our heads of states, as I mentioned, is unprecedented. 49 state parties to the AFCFTA that have collectively accepted the obligations to eliminate and reduce barriers to intra-Africa trade and barriers to intra-Africa investment. Second, tariff reductions and simplified customs systems are taking shape, removing long-standing barriers to trade. Third, commercially meaningful trade is taking place. Businesses are taking advantage of the market presented by the AFCFTA, benefiting from reduced or zero tariffs. In this regard, close to 3,000 certificates of origin have been issued, which means that the private sector, the informal traders, as well as smallholder farmers are taking advantage of this new market. We have concluded and adopted critical protocols that will anchor Africa's economy, which includes the Protocol on Investment, the Protocol on Intellectual Property Rights, which is set to support innovation, the Protocol on Competition Policy to ensure fairness of markets, and most recently we concluded the Protocol on Digital Trade and the Protocol on Women and Youth in Trade. Policy reforms are underway in many countries across the African continent to ensure that national economies are aligned with the objectives and the imperatives and the reform agenda that the AFCFTA presents. We do see change taking place. We do see, as the report that was presented just before this segment sets out, increasingly trade amongst African countries is taking place within the manufacturing sector, which is precisely the objective that we seek to achieve. Nigeria, Africa's largest economy. As of 2024, the Bureau of Statistics of Nigeria announced that Africa is now Nigeria's largest export destination, and it used to be in the past that it was the European Union and other regions of the world. This is evidence that the AFCFTA can present transformative opportunities for our economies, particularly SMEs, the youth, smallholder farmers, as well as tech entrepreneurs. Through the protocol on digital trade, we intend to harness this significant market, which is estimated to be over $712 billion by the year 2035, the digital economy of Africa, presenting opportunities for young entrepreneurs who are at the cutting edge of digital innovation, providing opportunities for investment in data centers, in the commercialization of data, movement of data across the continent, as well as opportunities for investment in digital public infrastructure. Working with Afreximbank, we've introduced a number of very important tools to achieve the objective of an integrated economy in Africa. I should say that without the support of Afreximbank, the AFCFTA will not succeed. The reduction and elimination of tariff and non-tariff barriers requires financial support. It requires trade finance tools. It requires tools for intervention in industrial development, in green trade, in green industrialization, and other facilities that the Afreximbank has introduced over the years. And so in this context, allow me to mention but a few of these facilities. Working with Afreximbank, we introduced the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, which enables payment in local currency at reduced costs and instantaneously. Our estimates collectively, Afreximbank and the AFCFTA Secretariat, are that this will reduce the cost of trade and currency convertibility by close to $5 billion United States dollars, enabling our SMEs to take advantage of this market. Trading in the United States dollar or any other currency has no business between African countries. We must use our own currencies. We must ensure the economic sovereignty of our continent, guard ourselves against the ever-shifting global geopolitical tensions which have an impact on payments. And therefore, working with Afreximbank, we submitted to the Assembly of Heads of States and Government the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System as Africa's system for payments and rolling it out throughout the continent. Second, we established the AFCFTA Adjustment Fund, again through the intervention of Afreximbank, mobilized up to $10 billion with a seed capital of $1 billion to support countries as they implement the AFCFTA. A third, we established the AFCFTA $1 billion facility for the automotive sector to enable components manufacturers to participate in the market of automotive vehicle assembly and manufacturing, which by the year 2035 is estimated to be at about $46 billion, where the right interventions are made to support manufacturing. We also rolled out trade enabling tools such as the AFCFTA e-tariff book, the rules of origin manual, and soon we will launch the AFCFTA Transit Guarantee Scheme. We therefore have moved beyond political declarations. We have moved beyond expressions of aspirations to creating a rules-based, functional, operational, multilateral African trading system underpinned by legally binding protocols across the various sectors of Africa's economy, including competition, investment, and as I've just mentioned, digital trade. We should be proud of what we've achieved. We should celebrate these modest achievements. However, we should be mindful of the challenges that lie ahead. We should be under no illusion that the journey ahead will continue to be difficult. Challenges such as lack of efficiency of our customs systems, the cost of trade finance, which prohibits market entry of our SMEs, will continue to require collaboration, particularly amongst our commercial banks and development finance institutions. We will continue to experience conflict and pockets of instability, as we see in some parts of our continent. And where this instability does take place, millions and millions of farmers are shut out of markets. We shall continue to confront the proliferation of coup d'etats, which again prohibit smallholder farmers, SMEs, from accessing markets across the various regions of our continent. And in this regard, our heads of states were very, very clear during the extraordinary session of the Assembly of Heads of States and Government of the African Union when they convened in Malabo to condemn unconstitutional changes of government in our continent, which push back our continent decades back into poverty. We will continue to confront challenges that relate to externalities of the global externalities presented by the global financial system on our own economy, and these will impact negatively on our ability to uphold our commitments, rights and obligations under the AFCFTA for market access. The slow ratification of the protocol on movement of persons will also be a key challenge that we must confront. The right of establishment of our businesses across the continent, the right of small, medium enterprises and other business people to transact and to move around the continent in pursuit of trade and investment opportunities shall continue to be a challenge. And in this regard, we have to work together through the African Union to ensure that the Protocol on Movement of Persons is adopted and ratified to enable the anchor of Africa's economy, small medium enterprises, to take advantage of this AFCFTA market. All of this shall require stronger and greater collaboration. As I conclude, the vision of our founding mothers and fathers was bold, it was ambitious, and it was hopeful. They dreamt of an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa, united in purpose to integrate the economy of our continent. I dare say that today, through the AFCFTA, Afreximbank's interventions, we have taken giant steps forward to meet their ambitious dream. And so we stand on their shoulders, the founding mothers, the heroines of Africa's liberation struggle, the countless citizens of our continent who gave their lives to ensure that future generations, those of us that are here, see the benefits of their hard labor. We do, however, have a task at hand, and that is to finish the job that they started. The second objective, which I set out, which is economic integration of our continent that continued to evade us, that task falls on our shoulders. The success of the AFCFTA demands continued political leadership, which is there. Our heads of states are committed. Each and every head of state is absolutely committed to provide the necessary political leadership for this to succeed. We should push forward with renewed clarity and commitment. The AFCFTA Secretariat is committed to work with our development finance institutions, Africa 50, Africa Finance Corporation, the African Development Bank, Afreximbank, Trade and Development Bank of Africa, and others, to ensure that we deploy the required and the necessary capital to industrial development, to invest in Africa's industrial development capabilities, to invest in Africa's trade supporting infrastructure, so that we can see the benefits of this significant market. As I mentioned before, in a different platform, I do not know about you, but as an African, I am tired of being a continent of potential. We must turn this potential into reality. We must see the potential producing results for young Africans, for our SMEs, and for our smallholder farmers. And so let me end where I started. This is the most ambitious and compelling economic reform agenda of a generation. And I want to quote Professor Adebayo Adedeji, the former executive secretary of UNCTAD, or rather of UNECA. And I quote, "Africa has to break the apron strings of structural and relational dependence on producing a limited number of cheap primary commodities." Allow me to repeat the words of Professor Adedeji. Africa has to break the apron strings of structural and relational dependence on producing a limited number of cheap primary products. I believe that with the AFCFTA, combining the liberalization of trade and investment with the necessary capital investment in industrial production, in critical minerals processing, in positioning our continent for the green industrialization and the green growth that all of us want to see, working together with development finance institutions of our continent, and as was noted earlier, we are now on our own as a continent. I believe that we are well poised to meet the challenge that Professor Adebayo Adedeji put to us, and that is to break the apron strings of structural and relational dependence, producing limited, cheap commodities. And so my attempt this morning was to set out where our continent comes from in terms of the mandate that was given to the Organization of African Unity, and where you and I have a challenge, a mandate, and a task to continue on the journey that they started, to implement the vision of an integrated continent where Africans are able to move freely across borders, where Africans are able to invest freely across borders, and where Africans are able to trade freely across borders using their local currency with no dependence on third currencies. This, to me, is the challenge of our time. It is a challenge that I believe all of us have the capacity to meet when we work together, so that the founding mothers and fathers of the Organization of African Unity, their hard labor would not be in vain. And so over the next few days, we are not only deliberating about the transactions that could take place amongst business people here, we are also building on a past and building a future. I wish all of us very good deliberations, and I want to thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, His Excellency, the Secretary General of the AFCFTA Secretariat. Now we move on to a lightning-fast but deep dive panel on how to progress towards Africa's trade and economic integration. The discussion will be steered by very capable hands, those of Mr. Yusuf Daya, Director of AU-AFCFTA Relations and Trade Policy at Afreximbank. Give him a round of applause as he joins, and he's going to invite his panelists to the stage.
Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests. Please allow me to also stand on the established protocols of today. It certainly gives me great pleasure to moderate this panel of distinguished speakers on the topic of realizing the vision of African founders, progress towards Africa's trade and economic integration. His Excellency Wamkele Mene, the Secretary General, has just given us an inspirational address on the importance of the AFCFTA and Africa's economic integration. And indeed, this was the ambition of the founders of the Organization of African Unity in 1963. In fact, it is quite fitting that we are meeting in Abuja, because Abuja is the site where this ambition of integrating Africa economically was attributed and signed into an agreement on the Abuja Treaty, the establishment of the African Economic Community 34 years ago. But to dive into the discussions on progress moving forward, I would like to invite to our stage our distinguished panelists. First up, I would like to invite His Excellency Kabin Kamara, the former Prime Minister of Guinea. Please give him a round of applause. I would also like to invite Mrs. Patience Okala, Senior Advisor representing the Honorable Dr. Jumoke Oduwole, Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment of Nigeria. I would like to invite Mr. Abdul Aziz Ba, Chief Executive Officer of the Africa Trade and Distribution Company. And finally, Dr. Gainmo Zanamwe, Director, Trade Facilitation and Investment Promotion at Afreximbank. Good afternoon to my... Distinguished guests, apologies for that, but we have the Minister, Dr. Jumoke Oduwole, Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment of Nigeria, who will be joining the panel. Please give her a round of applause. Excellencies, as we dive into this panel discussion on the topic of realizing the vision of African founders, progress towards Africa's trade and economic integration, I would like to turn to His Excellency, Mr. Kamara. Mr. Kamara, in the context of current global developments, global economic shocks, the trend to protectionism, the increasing in multipolarity, and their impact on African economies and trade, can you share with us from your perspective what Africa needs to do to accelerate its integration agenda, given that we have been talking about integration since independence. And yes, we see the AFCFTA coming into force, trying to accelerate that, but what more do we need to do to ensure that, particularly given the current global context?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I will deliberately speak in French so that I will make some difficulty to those who have been listening English since this morning. And also, for a matter of equity, I think that the English translator should now get some repos and then lead the discussion. Je voudrais dire que, avant de parler du sujet dont vous m'avez parlé, peut-être que ce serait bien de revenir un peu en arrière pour dire comment vraiment l'Afrique est allée de manière progressive vers son intégration et comment il a été décidé de manière délibérée pour aller de l'avant. Commençons d'abord par la création de l'OUA en 1963. Bien, vous savez qu'au moment de la création de l'OUA, il y a eu à peine 23 pays qui sont unis pour décider du sort de l'Afrique et faire en sorte que ce continent devienne un continent résilient dans l'unité, mais également dans l'économie. Quelques mois après, ils ont lancé la création de la Banque africaine de développement à Khartoum. Et peu de gens oublient ça. Ça, c'est une volonté délibérée de doter l'Afrique d'une notion de financement qui allait faire en sorte que le développement de l'Afrique soit modéré de façon que les pays africains aient des financements. Il y avait à peine une trentaine de pays à l'époque qui ont signé également ceci. Et c'est bien après que d'autres initiatives sont venues pour continuer. L'Afreximbank est arrivée en 1993, ici même à Abuja. Vous voyez que d'étape par étape, les pays africains ont voulu absolument continuer à se doter de moyens pour leur intégration, leur développement économique. Ici à Abuja, je faisais partie des personnes qui, pendant 2 jours, ont travaillé de nuit pour faire en sorte que les statuts soient signés, que le siège soit décidé, que le conseil d'administration soit mis en place, que le premier président, la personne de M. Dourdou, soit élu et que par la suite, la banque soit lancée. C'était extrêmement challengeant et c'est par la suite que les autres initiatives sont venues. Donc le plan de Lagos et l'agenda 2063. Tous ont mis l'accent sur la nécessité de faire en sorte que l'Afrique se dote d'institutions et d'instruments. Parce qu'il ne s'agit pas d'avoir une vision, il faut se donner les moyens de les réaliser. Et cet agenda 2063 parlait déjà de la création d'une zone de libre-échange. Et c'est par la suite qu'est né le ZLECAf. C'est en ça qu'il faut saluer la marche progressive et la volonté délibérée des gouvernements africains pour aller de l'avant. Pour revenir maintenant à votre question, le contexte d'aujourd'hui, c'est vraiment challengeant. Il y a beaucoup de chocs, il y a beaucoup d'incertitudes, mais c'est de bonnes opportunités pour l'Afrique. Parce que chaque fois qu'il y a des difficultés, vous cherchez à vous trouver de nouvelles solutions. La façon dont les pays occidentaux sont devenus égoïstes, ils sont devenus en train de développer ce qu'on appelle la souveraineté économique. C'est l'occasion pour les pays africains de renforcer nécessairement le fait qu'ils doivent commercer entre eux, valoriser ce qu'ils peuvent développer et faire en sorte qu'ils puissent développer les infrastructures et lever toutes les barrières qui permettent de faire en sorte que le commerce africain puisse se développer. Et c'est aussi l'occasion de donner beaucoup de moyens financiers et de renforcer les instruments de financement pour que nos pays africains puissent aller de l'avant.
Well, thank you very much, Excellency. And I think it's very important to highlight that those important roles that the African Export-Import Bank and the financial institutions play in driving that integration. Honourable Minister, my next question will be directed to you. Nigeria, among the largest economies on the continent, a key driver of intra-African trade and a key player in the success of the AFCFTA. Could you kindly share with us some things that Nigeria has been doing in terms of driving the implementation of the AFCFTA, domestic the agreement, and making sure Nigerian businesses are able to take advantage of the opportunities it creates?
Thank you very much for the question. It's really a pleasure to be here, President Orama, and the entire Afrexim team. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. So Nigeria's position with AFCFTA has taken a gradual acceleration. Let's put it that way. So the AFCFTA implementation is now 5 years old, and I believe Nigeria is the first country to announce on the 16th of January this year, when we were visited by the Secretary General of the AFCFTA, our intention to complete our inaugural 5-year assessment, and that has since been done. Now, in February of this year, I inaugurated a central coordinating committee which has all the right players in the room. So a lot has been happening in the country over the last 5 years, but probably not as coordinated as it should be. So that Central Coordination Committee, which I chair, has all the players that should be in it, from customs to NAFDAC to SON, everyone working in tandem with the private sector, and that has been really important. So for instance, when you come to practical implementation, or what does that mean in practice to the MSMEs that we support, it means that, for instance, with UNDP, we negotiated a new air cargo corridor with Uganda Air, and we also mapped 13 southern and eastern African countries where Nigerian goods are in demand. We released a toolkit showing private sector where their goods are in demand, particularly MSMEs. So supporting those businesses, we had the flag off of that flight, of the maiden flight, about a month ago now, and practically helping them to trade. The Nigerian Export Commission, the Nigerian Export Promotion Council, has also been supporting female entrepreneurs in particular. They were in Namibia, and as we speak, the AU MSME Forum is taking place in Abuja right now, and that's where MSMEs across Africa come to trade. Of course, the biggest of such fairs is the Afreximbank fair, which will be taking place in Algiers first week of September. So these are the practical ways, domestication and operationalization, or I've had a really long week, of AFCFTA implementation in Nigeria. So those are some of the key examples that I can start with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, and I think that gives me a good segue into my next question, which I'll be addressing to Mr. Ba from the African Trade and Distribution Company. One of the issues that the continent has faced is following the structural adjustment programs, the dismantling of commodity boards, the ability to aggregate and the ability to supply at scale within the continent. I know the ATDC tries to do some of this, but I'm going to ask you to talk us through what the ATDC is and the critical role that we see the ATDC playing in advancing the AFCFTA and intra-African trade.
Good morning, and thank you for this question, and thank you for having me here. I would like to thank also Mr. Professor Orama, who has kindly invited me to be part of this panel. So actually, ATDC, that stands for Africa Trade and Distribution Company, objective is really to be able to help to address those issues. It has been formed by FEDA through Afreximbank, by Arise IIP, and Equitan. The main purpose of ATDC is to be the African trader for commodities within Africa and move all the goods in transforming the goods within the continent and supplying some logistics help as well. We all know the problems we have in Africa to be able to be more integrated, and this is now the time to have a strong company that will help to address all these gaps and these issues. So our main job and function will be to buy from local communities, aggregate the different commodities, transform these commodities, and supply the logistics within the African continent. Goes from soft commodities to crude oil and to refined commodities. We also have the objective to incorporate in every countries some local ATDCs to help them to make them grow and develop this type of initiative. That's the job of ATDC.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Ba. And Dr. Zadamwe, turning to you, we know that since the establishment of the AFCFTA, since the signing of the agreement, and very often President Orama and His Excellency Wamkele talk about Afreximbank and the AFCFTA being twins. What are some of the major initiatives, programs that Afreximbank has put in place to support implementation of the AFCFTA, but also looking forward, what is planned, or what can we look forward to?
Well, thank you very much, Yusuf. And my job has actually been made very easier by the poet who started in the morning by telling us more about the 1963 decision that was made by the founding fathers. And what actually struck me from what the poet was saying, there are three main things that he highlighted, if any of you were listening. He talked about the very first decision that spoke about the need to introduce a payment and settlement system. He also talked about the importance of trade fairs. And most importantly, he talked about transit facilities. And I would like to go back to that 1963 decision, which is basically what Afreximbank has been focusing on through the leadership of Professor Orama. We actually have been working with the AFCFTA Secretariat to support the implementation of those practical things that will get the AFCFTA working. With regards to the transit guarantees, we have actually been working with the AFCFTA Secretariat to ensure that the vision of our founding fathers, to ensure that goods can actually move from Cape to Cairo with a single technology-enabled transit bond, it becomes a reality. Afreximbank is actually working with the AFCFTA Secretariat, put in place the African Collaborative Transit Guarantee Scheme, which is backed by a $1 billion facility. And we are already working with some of our partners, ZEPRE, which is a COMESA reinsurance entity. We are already issuing transit bonds that will actually ensure that trucks do not spend a lot of time on the borders, but they can actually move. It could be from Lagos all the way to Abidjan with a single transit bond. The other important initiative that you also heard about is the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. We know that annually we are losing about $5 billion in terms of transaction costs because we are not trading in our own currencies, in African currencies. Afreximbank, again working with the AFCFTA Secretariat, has introduced the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, which is currently operational, and we have now 16 central banks that have signed and more than 150 commercial banks. So Nigeria, of course, was one of the key countries that embraced the system, and it's working very well. We also introduced the African marketplace, which can actually allow the business people, corporates, to actually exchange local currencies. And a good example is actually what we've been doing with ZEPRE, and that has been working very well, as Kenya Airways. So these are some of the practical interventions that will actually liberate intra-African trade that is not currently taking place because we are waiting for Forex. With a Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, which has been endorsed by the AU Summit, we believe that we should be able to facilitate trade under the AFCFTA and reduce the costs of trading. And I also want to highlight another key initiative, which I think is very important in terms of facilitating intra-African trade, which is the trade fair. We go back all the way to the 1963 decision, where the leaders actually called for the introduction of trade fairs. We started with the All Africa Trade Fair, which was held in Kenya in 1972. But after another edition that took place in Egypt and Nigeria, the trade fairs did not continue. And it was through the leadership of Professor Orama, we managed to actually revive the trade fairs. And we started by hosting the inaugural Intra-African Trade Fair in Egypt in 2018. To date, I think the rest is history. We have managed to generate more than $100 billion in terms of trade and investment deals. And we actually brought together more than 70,000 participants to the 3 editions of the trade fair and more than 4,500 exhibitors. So we are now organizing the 4th Intra-African Trade Fair in Algeria, Algiers, from 4 to 10 September, and I would like to invite everybody in the room to make sure that you come to the Intra-African Trade Fair, where we are actually targeting to generate business deals that are worth $44 billion. We are targeting 2,000 exhibitors and more than 35,000 participants. So this is an Africa to Africa event that is actually going to solve the problem of lack of access to trade and market information, and we invite all of you to actually come to Algeria. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Dr. Zanamwe. And there's a variety of interventions to support implementation of the AFCFTA from Afreximbank. And I think this is why I want to again turn to His Excellency, Mr. Kamara. Earlier this morning, we heard Mr. Zubairu speak about the Alliance of African Multilateral Institutions. We had representatives of the diaspora. How do we use these networks? How do we use these institutions and use what the bank, like Afreximbank, is doing to support integration and to accelerate the AFCFTA and broader integration, particularly given the current challenges we face as a continent?
Thank you very much. I was very fascinated when I listened to what he said. One of the things I did appreciate with Dr. Orama, I worked with for 14 years at the bank. I left the bank to become prime minister in my country. When I left, he was just director of planning. The day he became vice president, things changed dramatically. He had a vision. He was committed. Not only was he was enthusiastic. So every time he was laying down a foundation, I was writing to him when I was prime minister, when I got back to my country. Dr. Rama, I think the limit for you is the sky. Because he is always inventing and creating. Now, we must help him. How? It's good to have a policy. It's good to have a payment system. It's good to have a trade fair. But there are 3 main elements that we need to develop. First, we must absolutely develop infrastructure. No matter if you got people in Algeria or in Egypt, how to move goods from Algeria to Conakry or to Lagos. We must combine efforts at all levels to increase massively infrastructure. Very important. To leave Conakry to Bamako, it's only 96 kilometers. In rainy season, you spend 5 days. Can you imagine the cost for move? We move Conakry to Sierra Leone, it's only 200 kilometers. You can do 2 days. So with those impediments, it will be very difficult to achieve the magnitude you want to do. That's number one. Number two is to go down or to grass level. Our traders are not fully equipped and informed and sincere about what ZLECAf can do and NAFTA can do. It is not very well known in many countries. We must continue to educate them, to tell them what is the importance, not to be at the political level. And that needs for us to implement in each country a branch or at least a state institution that can promote intra-African trade. In many countries, you have Ministry of Foreign Affairs and African Integration, but that ministry does not play that role, and we must continue to advocate that. The third element is the payment system. Yes, we started that, but how many banks are implementing it? There are a lot of resistance. We must continue strongly at the level of not only of central bank, but at the political level, so that the African head of state can know that now they have a possibility to bypass foreign banks that are imposing on us a very high cost of transaction. We can do things by ourselves. And lately is education, digital transformation. We need to invest in all digital infrastructure, backbone, submarine cable, that we can reduce the cost of transaction. There is a lot of opportunity in that area. You cannot easily continue contact Nigeria and Conakry. If you start connecting, it breaks. So by facilitating the connectivity in many means, we can also encourage traders to work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And I think those are critical points because we often hear about the challenges of infrastructure. We hear about the challenges our manufacturers and our producers face. And I'm going to use that as an opportunity to come back to you, Mr. Ba. How is the ATDC going to solve some of these challenges for us? We know that Africa has a multitude of SMEs, small-scale farmers. How do we use the ATDC and the national trade and distribution companies to integrate them practically so that they can take benefit of the AFCFTA?
Thank you for, yeah, that's a very, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. And ATDC will help because all these problems, we know them already. So the industry in Africa is very fragmented. So having a national company that has the strengths, the skills to aggregate, to produce enough volumes to be able to move the ships around Africa from one place to the other one, to aggregate, to transform, because we have industrial zones in Africa, is part of the journey. So having a local national champion that is capable of trading with small SMEs, medium SMEs, aggregate, have enough volumes and size, build the infrastructure, help on the logistics side to be able to transform those goods in Africa and then export within the continent. That's why it's important to have policymakers, strong banks, and private sector to come together to join hands to leverage on what is existing already. Africa infrastructure now is getting much better than before. There's still some bottlenecks in terms of clearing some customs because of the logistics issues. We need to have enough size, enough mass to be able to track interest from the biggest shipping lines, and that's what ITDC is doing today. We work with areas in the IIP in different zones. We have enough volumes in terms of commodities. We will have some partnership in many countries in Africa, in Nigeria, in Zimbabwe, in Benin, in other countries, to have local ATDCs in Malawi to be able to speak with the farmers, integrate their goods, have enough volumes, and then ship them around the globe. We'll have enough facilities with Afreximbank and local institutions to be able to have the working capital that is needed. But what is critical is to have enough volumes, size, at one single entry point. And that's the vision that our funders have, and now we're coming to execution. This is the way we believe that ATDC can be able to support the integration of African economies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ba. And this is quite exciting and quite innovative approach to addressing some of the challenges that the continent is confronting. Honorable Minister, I'm going to come back to you now, specifically in the context of Nigeria. How is Nigeria positioning itself with ATDC? How is it taking advantage of some of the programs and initiatives that Dr. Zenamwe talked about, that Afreximbank has put out there? And what more would you like to see? What would you like to see Afreximbank, our other institutions, doing to support Nigeria take advantage of the AFCFTA?
Thank you very much for that question, Yusuf. I thought you were being a bit modest, probably not to upset some of your other partners. But last Saturday, in the presence of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu at the West African Economic Summit, we had the privilege of announcing a collaboration that we're entering into with ATDC. That's Nigeria is probably your first. So let's acknowledge Nigeria, always the first. So what that would do for us is that we're using the Nigeria Commodities Exchange, which is one of the agencies under the Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, and working with ATDC. It will be an operational entity of the ATDC on ground and definitely would reduce post-harvest losses. We all know the challenges of post-harvest losses across our countries. Nigeria is no exception, and so this aggregation will help that. And then it will structure commodity courts, so to make sure that commodities can be organized and they can get a better cost, a better returns on their goods. Also providing market intelligence, both in country and across the board and global commodities markets. So market intelligence asymmetry is somewhere where we suffer a lot and we suffer losses because of that. And selfishly on our end, it helps us to revitalize the Nigeria Commodities Exchange as a hub for structured commodities exchange. So we have a lot of aggregators coming to the country. We have cost of food issues. We have food security concerns that we're addressing, and this is one of the areas that is very, very dear to Mr. President's heart. So it's unlocking the power of our domestic markets regionally, and it's going to position Africa very strongly in the global commodities market.
No, thank you very much, Honorable Minister. I'm being passed a note here saying I need to wrap up. So I'm going to ask Dr. Zaramwe one more question before we wrap up. Dr. Zaramwe, His Excellency Kamara talked about something very important, digital innovation and the opportunities the technology sector provides for us. What is Afreximbank doing, particularly in digital innovation, that can support implementation of the AFCFTA?
Well, thank you very much. I think in terms of digital innovation, at Afreximbank, we basically believe that not only is the future digital, but even the present. We have already started working on the Africa Trade Gateway, which is basically our super digital platform that has got the Pan-African and Payment and Settlement System that I talked about, as well as our KYC due diligence platform, MANSA, and we also have got our market intelligence platform, TRADA, and we also have got the Africa Trade Exchange. But we are going beyond that. We are actually also focusing on working on what we call digital borders to actually decongest the movement of goods through using technology to ensure that we introduce smart gates at the borders. This is what will make the AFCFTA to work. But also, maybe whilst I have the floor, the theme that we are talking about, for integration to really work, we need to focus more on industrialization and value chain. And this is something that His Excellency Wamkelemen has always been talking about. But we need to do more of that, identify potential regional value chains, and ensure that we support those value chains with financing. And at Afreximbank, we already have been doing a lot of that. For supporting intra-African trade value chains, we've actually disbursed more than 20 billion in our first strategy. In the current strategy, we're going to disburse more than 40 billion to support some of the intra-African trade value chains. Some of you know what we've already done with Dangote. We are now even working on the minerals that we are actually going to add value to produce those batteries that are actually needed for the continent. So these are some of the issues, just to put the industrialization and value chain angle to the discussion on integration to make it meaningful. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Dr. Zaramwe. And I think all that is left for me is to Honourable Minister, please. Go ahead.
Not to say one or two things as a co-digital trade champion for the AFCFTA, and just to speak to the EDGE program that will be launched later this year. I'm sure the Secretary General may have spoken about it. But just to say that as the need for digital public infrastructure, Nigerian Republic of Benin may be the first to have a digital border, soon also probably with the support of Afreximbank. So we continue to champion for the whole continent, attracting capital and investment into all these areas that will benefit the whole of the region, using the AFCFTA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. Distinguished guests, I think for me, all I need to say and to wrap up and to take the insights from all our panelists is that African integration is something I've been working on my whole life. I've done the research, I've done the history on it, and His Excellency Wamkele talked about the signing of the AFCFTA agreement in 2018, the fastest ratifications, 49 ratifications, 54 signatories. And just in a space of 7 years, having worked in the trade negotiation space, what is quite inspirational is to see that we are not just talking about drafting agreements anymore, but we are seeing practical solutions to drive implementation and to drive trade. And for that, we've got to thank our panelists for their insight and for their valuable experience, and we'll still be calling on you to do a lot more. So thank you, everyone. Please give them a round of applause.
Okay. Now, the theme for this year's meetings, as I said before, is building the future on decades of resilience. Now we're going to reflect on the remarkable journey of Afreximbank's past leaders. And I would say, Professor Orama, one of the things, Professor Orama, I think that is a defining trait of Afreximbank is that its past leaders, its presidents, have an ability to build on the successes of their predecessors. It's a tradition deeply ingrained in the bank's DNA. Today, we have the privilege to hear from two of the visionary past leaders who've shaped the bank's enduring legacy. Now, to invite them onto the stage, I call on your moderator for this fireside chat, Mr. Ronnie Untuli, board member of Afreximbank, and he's also the chairman of Thelo. Give him a round of applause, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the next session. My name is Ronnie Ntuli. I have the honor of serving as a director on the board of Afreximbank. With that said, I would like to welcome the two former presidents of Afreximbank, President Edordu and President Ekra, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. Hello, can you hear me? Great. Ladies and gentlemen, I think the two presidents deserve a resounding round of applause. Thank you very much. For those that don't know, these are the big shoulders on which President Orama's success stands on, and hence my plea for a resounding round of applause for President. President, maybe we can get on with it. One, in the context of the theme for the conference, building on decades of resilience, one, and two, I think in the best interest of one, the bank, two, its shareholders, and for me, very importantly, in the context of the people that run the bank, I think institutional memory is hugely valuable. I wanted, just from a background point of view, President Edordu, where did you first hear about Afreximbank and what was your journey to joining the bank?
Thank you very much. I was a part of the very first efforts to set up the bank. I was in an Exim Bank myself, the Nigerian Export-Import Bank. As it turns out, Exim banking is not very popular. To tell the story of how Exim banking came into our continent is a very long tale, and I will spare you that. When Ndiaye made a proposal in 1987 to set up a mechanism for dealing with the problem of trade finance, he was really talking about unavailability of short-term financing. And 3 meetings were held. What was going to emerge was unclear. There were all sorts of ideas. Set up a unit in ADB to provide to fill the gap of retreating foreign banks who previously provided trade finance facilities to Africa, short-term trade finance facilities. Set up a totally new institution, which was even a subsidiary idea. What was more thought of was set up a unit in ADB. So 3 meetings were held. One in Cairo, one in Harare, Zimbabwe, and the final one where we now finally made up our mind in Cote d'Ivoire. Through these 3 meetings, all sorts of ideas were exchanged by potential stakeholders.
You have been watching the Afreximbank 2025 annual meetings, which has been held live in Abuja.